All right, so this video, we're going to answer some questions, comments, cheap shots from several past videos, including the Sawsmith table saw video, but starting with the most recent video on the pen mandrels on the Shopsmith. Opossum Piper from the Old North State of North Carolina said, I didn't realize there were so many pen mandrel options for the Shopsmith. Yeah, there are actually quite a number. I would suggest that you go over to Penn State Industries. It's Penn, Penn State Industries. Their website and their catalog, request a catalog, they'll send it to you, are excellent. And they've got a ton of things that are applicable to Shopsmith owners. Yes, you can find some high-end accessories from companies like Craft Supply of Provo, Utah, and your local woodcraft store or Rockler store have some as well. But the Penn State Industries is really my go-to for kits and accessories such as mandrels. And there were a couple comments. Let me see if I can find them here. Ed, for example, said that he uses the Penn State Shopsmith adapter to good effect. Several people commented on this. So basically what this is, they have this device that eliminates the mandrel altogether. You drill the hole into your wood, you glue the tube into that, and then you mount an accessory on the end of the headstock spindle and a unique live center. Both of these have, I believe it's a 7 millimeter pin of sorts that goes into the end of that tube, eliminating the mandrel in between. So there's no tightening of a nut, which can theoretically put that piece that you're turning into some compression. Some pieces that I've turned in the past that were prone to splitting, like snake wood, for example, or an open grain wood like red oak, can be very difficult to turn as it is. And then when you put that blank under compression, it can make it even worse. So this is kind of a cool little mandrel you can get. There's a little bit of pressure onto your piece, but not a whole lot. And that's worth looking into. They're relatively inexpensive. I want to say they're like $30 to $35, but you're going to buy it once in your life. So yeah, worth looking at. I'll put a link to it, not an affiliate link by any means. See, Bob asked, and several other people commented about, so Bob didn't ask, he commented. Shopsmith makes a 4-inch tool rest. So I was using the standard 8-inch tool rest and showing how you, by moving the headstock away and swinging the tool rest in, you would have clearance for that. But no question, with the 4-inch tool rest, you have tons of clearance. So if you find yourself working on some of those projects that maybe only do one section of tubing, there are some pens that instead of using two pieces that you then twist to operate the pen, they work in other ways and they use just a single section. Those are great for turning because they're quick and easy and you don't have to match two pieces. So with a 4-inch tool rest, you can absolutely get there. A couple people commented on that, and I forget, I don't have a note here. Some folks even said, look, you can buy an 8-inch and just cut it down with a hacksaw. So yeah, I don't know if Shopsmith still sells the 4-inch tool rest or not. You can find them used for sure on eBay, or just find a standard tool rest, an extra one, and cut it down. That cast iron is very easy to cut with a hacksaw. As long as you have it locked firmly in place, you can even put it right there on your tool rest and cut it down there if you don't have a vise. Scott asked an excellent question about the use of Shopsmith's keyless chuck. There are several keyless chucks available that you can put onto the quill of your Mark V. There's some aftermarket ones, and then Shopsmith also makes one that I think is a 5/8-inch capacity. It's big though. It's a big monstrous chuck. And my experience with those type of accessories where you have an adapter, which essentially is what they've made to fit an off-the-shelf. They don't make that chuck, right? They buy an import chuck, and then you mount that on it. You've got a buildup of tolerances and runouts, and so I have found in playing with those, you get a bit more wobble than I like. Super high-end chucks don't have that problem, but I don't consider that one really high-end. So it's still my opinion. I prefer to use that 1/4-inch collet, router collet that Shopsmith makes, and that works very, very well. Runs nice and true. Drew said, how many, okay. So this one's going back to the video on the Sawsmith 2000 table saw, which I've just been using. Drew said, how many saws does Scott have? And also, was this thing set up for datoing and molding? And do you know why they didn't use that particular fence system on other Shopsmith products? So let's address the Excalibur fence real quick. Uh, it was not made, with your Shopsmith, you've got your main table, and then you got an accessory table, extension table, and then you may have floating tables if you have a Model 500, Model 510. If you have a Model 500 and you were to put these fence rails on your machine, you wouldn't gain much. You'd have very, very narrow support. In order to use this with the 510, 520 approach, you have to have the ability to slide a tube in to connect everything. These don't have that. There is no accommodation in these rails to connect floating tables, for example. So Shopsmith, I guess, never saw the need to try to make this fence work with the Mark V. As for datoing and molding, let's pull the insert out of here and take a look at what's going on under the hood, and we'll talk about the effects of molding and datoing on this machine. Because of the size of this insert, Shopsmith added 4 screws to hold it in place. And yes, there were a couple inserts made. This one is the sawing insert. There's a datoing and a molding insert. Notice that it's got a great big corrugation or a pair of ridges that are formed into it to give it a very slight rise in the middle. So it stands a little tall in the middle. And that way you put it in place, and using these screws, you can get it level with the table right here where it meets the blade. So down inside here, we have what is essentially the lower saw guard of a Model 510, 520 table saw. They did modify it a little bit, and whoever owned this machine before me made a few modifications of their own, including losing a couple of the threaded studs and the knobs that mounted this. Let me double check, make sure I am unplugged. What you can see here is it does use the Shopsmith's saw arbor system that allows us to lock the blades onto a flat that's machined on that 5/8 inch shaft. So that means we can use our standard molder dado arbor on here in order to do molding and datoing. Now, a problem that came up with this was this table doesn't come up quite high enough, at least not giving us the same depth of cut with our molder head. So somebody at Shopsmith redesigned the molder head in order to make it a bit larger diameter. But then it turned out that in that larger diameter, it just didn't have the power to turn it. So somebody got the idea of changing the angle of the blades, which they did. Now, it worked okay, but the problem is those cutters were designed to have them mounted in a particular angle, and now they were no longer that same angle. So some of the matching cutters, like stile and rail cutters and drop leaf table cutters, didn't work quite right on the Sawsmith 2000 table saw. I'm going to slide that carriage back here, and I'm going to loosen the table tilt, and you can see how this thing moves through the range of tilting angles. And with that tilted slightly, you can see how it slides along those ways. You'll also see it's got a little felt brush, both front and back, that are designed just to keep these tubes as clean as possible ahead of and behind the cut. I'm hoping you can see this. I've got a crank that I can turn to raise and lower the blade, and you can see that's turning the hexagonal shaft, and by rotating that shaft, it's going through a 90-degree transmission. And that is raising that entire carriage up and down. It's turning a threaded rod, or maybe it's just turning the nut around the carriage rod. So those two posts that you see with springs on them, those occasionally need to be waxed. And much of this would benefit from a little bit of oil applied. Not much, because you don't want to attract sawdust. This red knob right here is the one that we turn to clamp our riving knife in place so it can travel behind the blade. Michael asks, is there anywhere to get the miter gauge stop? So on the Sawsmith 2000, your miter gauge, in order to keep it from moving back while you're using the cross-cutting feature, Shopsmith created this little variation of their what they call a T-nut. If you're a woodworker, you probably know something else called a T-nut. But this is a little thing that slides into the T slot on the miter gauge slot on your table. It also can fit into the rails on the 510 fence, the upgraded fence for the 500, the upgraded fence for the bandsaw, and it also, these will fit into the face of the 520 fence system. But you can see what they've done is they've just taken the version that has threads for quarter 20, they've added a quarter 20 knob and just a little post that'll fit into that quarter 20. This post could be almost anything. You could use a shoulder bolt or something, but basically all you're trying to do is to make it easy to slide something in behind the fence into that T slot to lock it down in such a way that the fence can no longer come back. So this is something that you could make yourself. You can get the T-nuts from Shopsmith, quarter-inch nut. You could even use a Bittner nut there if you like. And then, like I said, you could use a shoulder bolt. And one more bonus fact that only you get to learn because you stuck around long enough to hear it. Around the time that they were developing the Sawsmith 2000, they were at Shopsmith also creating the new aluminum table for the bandsaw, and they were working on an upgrade to the router system, the overarm pin router. And one of the patented features was an adjustable miter slot. As you tighten the screws that hold those miter aluminum extrusions in place, the walls close in on your miter gauge. So if you have any of their tools that have that extruded aluminum piece, not only does that mean that you can replace it should it ever wear out, but you can fine tune it to fit your miter bar. So not only does that mean that you could replace that extrusion should it ever wear out, and let's face it, that's the part that's getting a lot of metal on metal action, but you can also fine tune it to fit your miter gauge bar just right. And this really comes in handy when you're using accessories like the tenon jig, where you've only got about a 4 or 5 inch long miter bar, and you really want to make sure that that is locked in nice and true. Someone also commented recently that their miter gauge fits their table saw but doesn't fit the bar in their aluminum bandsaw table. That's because somebody tightened those screws down thinking that, tighter must be better, and closed in those walls. Now, let's say that someone has done that, and by loosening the screws, you still can't accommodate your miter gauge or your miter bar. You can take that aluminum extrusion out and give it a little bend to open that mouth up, and then you can, again, reset it using the screws on top. So if you found that helpful, leave a comment that says something about thank you for the special tip, all right? It'll be just your information and mine since you stuck around to the end. Hey, I also want to thank my channel members. If you haven't visited mygrowthrings.com, you can sign up there, and it's got a little bit of a Facebookish kind of experience, but without all the ads and nonsense that Facebook keeps wanting to feed us. Be sure to check that out. But thank you, channel members, for supporting the channel, and I look forward to seeing you again real soon. Make it a great day.